Welcome to English Easy Hub. Join us as we ignite the flames of your English learning journey together.
Please subscribe to watch and embark on your English learning journey. Don't miss out on the exciting content. In this dialogue, Andy, a student working to improve his academic English, seeks guidance from his professor on the distinctions between academic and everyday English. Throughout their conversation, they explore key differences, focusing on aspects such as formality, vocabulary, sentence structure, transitions, and clarity. Andy actively engages in the discussion by asking insightful questions and reflecting on his own challenges with writing, while the professor provides in-depth explanations, offering practical techniques and strategies for mastering academic English.
Hi, Professor. I've been working on improving my academic English lately, but I'm getting a bit confused about how it differs from everyday English. Could you explain the key differences between the two?
That's a great starting point, Andy. The primary difference lies in formality and structure. Academic English is much more formal, precise, and structured than everyday English. It focuses on objectivity and avoids personal opinions unless they are evidence-based. On the other hand, everyday English is conversational, flexible, and often includes slang, idiomatic expressions, and informal grammar.
That makes sense. I think what's been tripping me up is the way I speak in casual conversations sometimes carries over into my writing, especially when I'm working on essays. I tend to use contractions in casual phrases. Should I be avoiding those entirely in academic writing?
Yes, in most cases, you should avoid contractions like don't, can't, or won't. They make the writing sound too informal. Instead, use the full forms like do not or will not. It's not just about formality, though. Avoiding contractions gives your writing more clarity and precision, which is essential in academic contexts.
Got it. I've also noticed that in academic writing, the sentence structures seem more complex. Is that another difference between academic and everyday English?
You're right. Academic English often employs more complex sentence structures, like using subordinate clauses and passive voice. This complexity helps in expressing nuanced ideas and arguments. For instance, rather than saying, "We conducted an experiment," you might say, "An experiment was conducted to examine the hypothesis." This shifts the focus from the subject to the action or outcome, which is often more appropriate in academic contexts.
Ah, I see. The passive voice makes it sound more objective, right? I guess it removes the personal element that everyday English might include.
Exactly. Academic writing strives for objectivity, so it minimizes the use of personal pronouns like I or we, unless you're explicitly writing a reflective piece. Instead, you focus on the research, facts, or theories. The passive voice helps in this, though it shouldn't be overused. You still want your writing to be clear and engaging.
That's a good point. Another thing I've struggled with is vocabulary. When I'm writing an academic paper, I feel like I need to use big, complex words to sound more academic. But I've read articles that say simplicity is better. What's your take on this?
That's a common concern. While academic English does require more precise and sometimes advanced vocabulary, it doesn't mean you should use overly complex words just to sound intellectual. Clarity is more important. For example, instead of using commence when begin works just fine, stick with a simpler term. It's about balance, using advanced vocabulary when necessary, but always ensuring your meaning is clear.
That's reassuring. I'll focus more on clarity. Speaking of vocabulary, I also noticed that in casual conversations, people often use phrasal verbs like pick up or run into. Should I avoid those in academic writing?
Absolutely, Andy. Phrasal verbs are a hallmark of everyday English, but they tend to sound too casual and sometimes vague in academic writing. For example, instead of pick up, you might use acquire or obtain. And instead of run into, use encounter. It's always better to choose a single, precise verb rather than a phrasal verb in formal writing.
That's a great tip. I'll start paying more attention to that. Another thing I struggle with is the use of transitions between paragraphs. In everyday speech, transitions happen naturally, but in my essays, I feel like the ideas don't flow well. How can I improve that?
Transitions are vital in academic writing because they guide your reader through your argument smoothly. In everyday conversation, we often jump from one idea to another without much thought. But in writing, you need to help the reader follow your logic. Use transition words like furthermore, moreover, in contrast, or as a result to indicate how one idea connects to the next. These words signal to the reader whether you're adding information, contrasting points, or showing cause and effect.
That makes sense. So, would you say that the role of transitions is to make the essay more cohesive and logical?
Precisely. Cohesion is key in academic writing. Transitions help link your ideas together in a way that is logical and easy to follow. They also allow you to build more complex arguments, showing how different points are related to each other. Without them, the reader might feel lost or confused about how one point leads to another.
I've noticed something else while reading academic papers. The authors often use very formal expressions like the results suggest or it is evident that. Is that part of academic English as well?
Yes, that's another feature of academic English, hedging. In academic writing, we often avoid making absolute statements. Instead of saying, the results prove, we say, the results suggest or indicate. This shows that we are open to the possibility of other interpretations. Hedging makes your writing sound more cautious and objective, which is highly valued in academic work. It reflects a scholarly tone of acknowledging uncertainty.
That's interesting. So, it's about showing that you're being careful not to overstate your findings, right?
Exactly. Academic writing values nuance and complexity, so it's important to acknowledge that there might be limitations or alternative explanations. Hedging helps convey that. It's also a way to show that your argument is based on evidence, but that evidence is always open to further interpretation or scrutiny.
That's a really useful insight. I hadn't thought about hedging like that. I've also been wondering, how do I deal with idiomatic expressions? They come so naturally in everyday speech, but I'm unsure whether they belong in academic writing.
That's a good observation, Andy. Idiomatic expressions should generally be avoided in academic writing because they can be ambiguous or culturally specific, making them harder for a wider audience to understand. For instance, instead of saying, it's a piece of cake, say it is a simple task. The goal is always clarity and precision. Idioms can be confusing, especially for non-native speakers or readers who aren't familiar with specific cultural references.
I see. So, it's not just about formality but also making sure my writing is accessible to everyone, regardless of cultural background.
Precisely. Academic writing often addresses an international audience, so it's crucial to use language that is universally understood. Avoiding idioms, slang, and culturally specific references makes your work more accessible and professional.
That's a great point. One last question: how can I practice academic English effectively? I've been reading a lot of research papers, but I feel like my writing is still lacking.
Practice is key, Andy. Continue reading academic articles, but don't just read them passively. Pay attention to the structure, the way arguments are framed, the choice of vocabulary, and how transitions are used. Another effective strategy is to write summaries or reflections on what you've read, trying to mimic the style and tone of the original text. You could also practice rewriting everyday sentences in a more formal, academic style. Finally, peer feedback is invaluable. Sharing your work with others for critique can highlight areas for improvement you might not notice yourself.
That sounds like a solid plan. I'll start incorporating more practice into my routine. Thank you so much for all your advice, Professor. This has been incredibly helpful.
You're very welcome, Andy. Keep practicing, and don't hesitate to reach out if you have more questions. Developing academic English is a gradual process, but with consistent effort, you'll see progress.
I'll definitely keep that in mind. Thanks again.
You're very welcome. I'm glad I could help. Keep practicing, and remember that consistent effort will lead to great progress. Don't hesitate to reach out if you have more questions in the future.
The core of this dialogue centers on the idea that academic English is more formal, structured, and precise than everyday English. By exploring specific elements like avoiding contractions, using formal vocabulary, employing transitions effectively, and understanding the importance of hedging, the professor helps Andy understand how to write with more clarity, professionalism, and academic rigor. The conversation highlights the importance of balancing complexity with clarity and emphasizes that academic writing is not just about sounding sophisticated, but about communicating ideas effectively and objectively.
Thanks for watching. Remember to subscribe, like, comment, and share to keep the English learning journey alive.